to have the opportunity to introduce Peter Kachiyama to all of you today. Peter is going to be a great speaker, a great keynote for us all to get us started in thinking about the future of Detroit. When we are hiring people at Weber Shamrock, similar to all of you, what we're looking for really is people with an innate curiosity and also a pride of place. We want people who love Detroit, who know Detroit, when they're working with and around anyone from throughout our network, whether it's working with people collaborating in Los Angeles or New York who don't understand Detroit, or whether it's Shanghai or Berlin, or the hipsters who care about what's going on in Detroit. Really to be proud and to be able to talk about the sense of pride of place and what makes Detroit a great city. Peter's really going to tackle that and really help us see the love affair between the people and their places and how we can all rally that and tell that story across everything that we are doing. Peter has a great background. He started out as a Buckeye from Akron, Ohio, and also the Ohio State University, but he has a law degree from Case Western in Cleveland as well. And his career has taken several turns where he's now, for the last several years, been the co-founder and producer of the Creative City Summit, an interdisciplinary event that brings together citizens and practitioners from around the world. He really is digging into this topic. He's spoken in cities all around the world and really talking about the mutual love affair between people and their place, and really one of the most important influences in their life. What that connection is between citizens and their cities, and really exploring that. So for that reason, I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce Peter to you all and turn the microphone over to him. Thank you.
I really do like coming back to Detroit. I first came here in 2007 at the invitation of MISHDA, Michigan State Housing Development Authority. And as was pointed out, the narrative that I had been hearing about Detroit and the reality of what I saw did not quite jive. And so ever since then, you have been very much part of my thought process. And in my book, I wrote extensively about Detroit. And in some ways, I compared you to New Orleans, and that's an interesting conversation about two great American cities and how they've responded, and sort of the similarities and some of the differences. And in the midst of this is a heady topic. This is an important topic. I'm going to try to remind us and maybe ground us back into this very fundamental notion that emotions matter, that the small things actually do make up some of the bedrock of the way we do feel about our places. And some of this stuff may get lost in conversations when you're talking about unfunded liabilities in the billions, and that's just frightening. I mean, let's face it. But I'm going to talk about some stuff that may seem kind of silly and kind of light, and maybe it is. But when it comes down to it, it does matter in terms of how we feel about our places. We'd like to think of ourselves as logical creatures, but at heart, we are emotional creatures. What we tend to do is we tend to make decisions emotionally, and then we sort of logically fill in the blanks to justify those kinds of thoughts. So I'd like to start out with this notion that this is maybe a slightly different approach to the way we think about cities. I want to start with a story. In March 2011, in Durham, North Carolina, there was a wedding. Like most weddings, there were brides, there were grooms, there were flowers, there were tuxedos. Unlike most weddings, though, there were 1,600 brides and grooms, and they weren't marrying each other. They were marrying the city of Durham in what they described as the largest civic union in history. These 1,600 people got up in front of their friends and neighbors, and they pledged their oath of love and fealty to the city. Now, the oath included the things like promise to keep the streets clean and safe, to support local arts and culture, to buy locally, to vote responsibly, to protect the environment. Pretty cool. And you might suspect that something like this might have come from the Chamber of Commerce or the city. But no, it actually started with this one particular woman, and the story goes that this woman really loved Durham. And somebody apparently once snarkily said to her, well, if you love it so much, why don't you marry it? She said, hey, pretty good idea. And hence the idea of Mary Durham was born. And what I love about this project is that it actually underscores the point that we are actually in a relationship with our places. But we don't think about that as a relationship. We have these highly examined personal and professional relationships. But when was the last time you thought about the relationship you have with your place in the context of it being a relationship? And let's face it, if any unexamined relationship, it can go bad. It can go stale. So if we're not actively thinking about this as very much a two-way street between us and our place, what is our role in making that relationship better? And what is the place's role in helping to facilitate a better relationship with its citizens? We need to be thinking about it in those kind of terms. Because when you start thinking about it in those kinds of terms, you bring in a different arsenal of weapons. You bring in the emotions. Because let's face it, relationships are emotional. And that, I think, is somewhat of the missing piece in all of the communications, in all of the storytelling that is out there. We are missing a little bit of heart. So I'd like to think that that is maybe part of what we're going to try to get back here today. Because I get to ask the question as I travel around, do you love your city? And most people will almost reflexively say they love their city. And I suspect that maybe it is the kind of people who come out and hear a guy who wrote a book called For the Love of Cities, they're probably already in this camp. The sad truth is that not enough of us love our places. Maybe amongst our peers and the people that we associate with, because obviously we care about our places, maybe amongst those folks, this is a commonly held belief. But not enough of us do. And we need to change that. If we care about the place, we need to be sort of the emotional ambassadors for that place. And when somebody says something bad, or somebody's getting a little sour on something, or somebody needs a hug, kind of in the metaphorical sense, we need to be those people who maybe step up and help change their mind, change their heart about that particular place. Because this question, what do you love and what do you hate about your places, is actually a universal one. Because I ask this all over the place as I travel around. And of course you'd expect, I do get a wide variety of responses, but I also get an almost comic uniformity around certain answers. And I've found that cross borders, cross nations, cross cultures, people are remarkably consistent. And they're remarkably consistent about the things they say they dislike, the things they say they hate about their communities. So what do we hate about our communities? Well, traffic, parking, bad education system, bad planning, ugly design. Big intractable problems that we spend tons and tons of money trying to fix, and I'm not sure we ever truly fix them. And nothing represents this more than the pothole. And I understand you guys are going through probably the worst pothole season on record, thanks to a very bad winter. And on Michigan Avenue last night, as we went out to Slows, one of my favorites, I said, yeah, these are pretty bad streets. And for most citizens, that is sort of the touch point that they have with their city. And that is maybe the benchmark that they use to grade the city. Is, if there's potholes, city's, not doing its job. City's is failing. And citizens will complain to the city will eventually get around to fixing the potholes, and for many folks, and in many ways, we have reduced this relationship down to its lowest common denominator, which is fixing the bloody potholes. Sad truth is, you can fix every pothole in Detroit, and the citizens are not going to give you, a whole lot of credit. They'll yawn, stretch, to say thanks, streets don't suck quite so bad. You get no love for fixing potholes. There is no emotional return on investment for fixing those potholes. Not to say we stop fixing the potholes, God forbid. No, but I think we need to agree that we actually have to aspire to something more. Now, I know that in a lot of cities, and certainly Detroit, maybe is even leading amongst them, that just fixing the potholes has proved to be a challenge. And coming out of the bankruptcy, you are dealing with all kinds of financial issues that many, many cities are not even coming close to. I totally get that. But it can't just be about paved roads, basic police and fire service. Yes, we absolutely have to provide those, but let's not pat ourselves too much on the back and tout those as our accomplishments, because our citizens, they just expect that. That is the lowest common denominator for being a functioning city. So we shouldn't be too proud of the fact when we actually sort of achieve, minimum basic requirements. Yay! You're not going to get a whole lot of love for that. And I get that we are struggling to get to that point. And what I'd like to remind us is, as we're still struggling to get to that point, we can't forget some of the other stuff. Of course, to be a working city, you have to be functional and safe. And in the past few years, and certainly coming out of the bankruptcy, there's this sense it's like, well, let's make it functional, let's make it safe, paint it battleship gray, kick it out the door, and that's good enough. I don't think so. I don't think even the most fiscally conservative tax hawks amongst us want to live in just a functional, safe, and battleship gray community. No. Well then, what do we actually aspire to in our places? Well, how about comfort? Why can't the city be comfortable? Conviviality, in the sense that our city actually helps facilitate maybe bringing us together and connecting us with our fellow citizens. Why isn't our city interesting? Maybe appropriately, why isn't the city fun? Where's the fun? Is a perfectly legitimate question that actually needs to be asked more in the context of better city making. You know, think about those meetings that we've all been in our professional lives when we're down there wrestling with some technical problem. We're in the weeds, as it were, right? You know, you're going back and forth in those meetings. Those meetings suck. No two ways about it. Next time you are in one of those meetings, it'd be kind of an interesting thing if you raised your hand and said, okay, I see what we're doing here, but I gotta ask, where's the fun? Because in that moment, you know, you ask that question, you're changing the dynamic in the room and the way people are at least thinking about the problem. You ask, where's the fun? Somebody smiles wistfully, and their eyes rise to the horizon and go, yeah, where is the fun? And in that moment, you open the door to the possibility of something beyond a merely technically sufficient solution. We can get very obsessed right now with technically sufficient solutions, especially when those seem to be elusive. And I get that they feel very elusive here in Detroit. But let's not forget to ask the question of where's the fun? Because at least we're thinking about the possibility and opening the door to that possibility of something more than just the technically sufficient. And how about if we put that into the specifications and the requirements for what we're actually doing? When was the last time you ever saw fun as an articulated goal or specification in any project you've ever done? Even a project which by its very nature, a park or a playground, which should be fun, no, it's got all kinds of legal, safety, and environmental requirements. But when was the last time you ever saw fun as an articulated requirement? Probably not. Well, if we at least put that in there, we're going to get somebody who's maybe working on the problem, somebody who's a little closer to the problem. We're going to get them maybe thinking about that as a potential outcome. And who knows, maybe you do get something that is a little bit more than what you basically contracted for. Where's the fun? Good question to be asked. Now, in building a better, more interesting, more lovable city, the things that make for lovable cities are the things that humanize cities, that bring them back to a scale that we can relate to as human beings. And certainly a bike-friendly city makes for a lovable city. Now think about how much of our city making actually seems to be in service to the car. Sometimes it feels like all of it, right? Where to put them, where to park them, all kinds of ratios, all kinds of rules and regulations around the car. Well, our citizens pick up on that. They feel that. So if you can become a little bit more bike-friendly, and you don't have to become the most bike-friendly city in North America. That'd be a really tough one to do. You'd have to become Boulder, Colorado, or something like that. That's probably not going to happen. But if you can become just a little bit more bike-friendly, people will notice that. And you're sending the message that it's not just about the car. We're at least thinking about you in the mix. And citizens do pick up on that. For similar reasons, a walkable city makes for a more lovable city. For most of the reasons you would think with the bike. But walking allows two really important things. Walking allows improvisation and discovery. Now, when somebody's driving 45 miles an hour down Woodward, the last thing you want them doing is improvising, right? That's probably not a good thing. But when they're walking down Woodward, you absolutely want them improvising. You want them walking down side streets, walking into shops they've never seen, walking into restaurants, and exploring their city and having that moment of discovery. How cool would it be for you to discover something new about the city you've lived in all your life? It's like discovering something new about your oldest friend. That's a good moment. And I'm not saying that can't happen when we're in our cars, but it's far more likely to happen when we get out of our cars and we interact with each other and we interact with our environment. And again, is Detroit going to become the most walkable city in America? No, you're just not built for that. But if you can become a little bit more walkable in just a few select areas, people will notice that, and it does make a difference. Now here's a good example of sort of taking the bull by the horns, and this happened in Raleigh, North Carolina in January 2012. A graduate student by the name of Matt Tomasulo and a couple of his friends went out one weekend in January, and they hung up about 36 signs all throughout the downtown core. And unlike most signs which are all about directing cars, these were actually signs that were about directing people. And what they were is trying to get people to think about the option of walking, like this one. It's an 18-minute walk to Glenwood South. It's a 7-minute walk to Raleigh City Cemetery. So I asked Matt, so okay, what was the thinking behind this? He goes, well, I wanted to give people at least the notion and to try to encourage them with the option of walking. Because people will almost reflexively get in their cars. Even if they could walk, it's 5 minutes away, we will get reflexively in our car and drive. Well, if you knew it was only 5 minutes away, it's like, oh, it's only 5 minutes? Sure, why not? Let's give it a try. And what he was essentially trying to do was sort of stimulate that conversation. And it worked. People love the signs. And all of a sudden now, the local press started to pick up on this. About a week after the signs went up, apparently a BBC film crew showed up in Raleigh because they figured out that apparently America has finally discovered walking cities. It's like, okay, let's cover that. And people were generally very buzzed about this. And of course, about a month later, city council got involved and says, wait, you didn't have permission to put up those signs. You got to take them down.
I knew it.
And sort of one of those classic things where, seriously, that's what we're all about. They actually did make them take the signs down. But the city manager was actually very forward-thinking. He says, wait a minute, well, this is dumb. We gotta get these signs back up. So there was a petition that was signed, and about 3 days later, the signs actually went up. But they had to come down first in order to get back up. And that was sort of an interesting point. And what this actually underscores is that sometimes we gotta break the rules in order to get to the place we actually want to be. I'm a lawyer by training, and one of the things I do recall from law school is there is the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And in between the two, there's a tension. And in that tension, the law evolves. Well, in our cities, there's of course the rules and regulations, the codes and the statutes. And then there should be the goal, which is a better, more interesting, more lovable city. Well, sometimes the rules and regulations don't allow us to get there, but they don't allow us to get there in the most expeditious way possible. And sometimes you need somebody who's willing to go outside the system to sort of unjam the system. Now, I get that maybe certain people are not the best ones to be leading on rule breaking. It's probably not a good idea if your mayor starts breaking rules. There's bad precedent around that. Certainly council or the people who are charged with enforcing the rules, it's probably not a good idea that they be seen as the ones breaking the rules. So maybe it's on the rest of the community, a lot of the young professionals, those hipsters that we keep sort of, we throw out that word. They are not afraid to sort of break some of the rules. Artists and creative folks have been, breaking rules for generations. We need to celebrate that. And we need to recognize that that is actually a very important role to play. Because again, those people who go out and break the rules, they help us unjam the system and they get us to the place where we actually want to be. So if you can't be that risk taker, support those who can take that risk. A dog-friendly city makes for a lovable city. Apologies to those of you who own cats and birds and fish and ferrets. People don't walk their cats. And if they do, we think they're odd, right? No, we walk our dogs. When we walk our dogs, we're actually out there using our environment. We're using green space, we're using the parks, we're interacting with other people. And that's actually a wonderful thing. Two people might pass each other on a typical street, no dog involved. And on a good day, you'll get a grunting, hey, hey kind of thing, right? But if there's a dog in the mix, and it's a friendly dog, and it's a cute dog, all of a sudden now that interaction can be kind of different. It's like, oh, what kind of dog is that? Oh, she's a puggle. What's her name? Buffy the puggle. And all of a sudden now you're having a slightly different interaction with this person than hey and hey, and it's because the dog has essentially negotiated that encounter for you. It's broken the ice. Now, I'm not saying you're going to become best friends with this person, but think about it. If you're in that neighborhood, that dog and that owner in that neighborhood, there's a pretty good chance you're going to see him again. And who knows where that conversation goes the next time. And a little side benefit now. In an era when we probably can't afford more police and more surveillance equipment, the dogs and the dog owners provide a sense of safety. And it's not because Buffy the Puggle is an attack dog. No, she's very timid. But the fact is I'm out there walking her at all hours of the day and night, creating what Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist, called the eyes of strangers on the street. There's nothing worse than walking down a completely empty street, right? We feel very exposed by that. But if there's a dog and a dog walker out there, it's all good. So maybe there's some neighborhoods here we would like to see get better. Maybe it's as simple as more dog parks in those neighborhoods. Or maybe it's even simpler. Maybe it's some mitts and one of those places to throw the poop that basically says dogs are welcome. Small thing like that. It's amazing to me how dogs in cities humanize cities for the better. And I was talking with some of the folks last night when we were having dinner. A lot of the apartments in the downtown core don't allow dogs. And I think that's a missed opportunity because dogs will pull people out of those apartments. Dog parks are probably the most social parts of your city. That's a missed opportunity. Maybe we should think about a way to start flipping that a little bit. Now, the things we do love about our places, they actually tend to be small things, I think, intimate things. And in my book, I liken them to the idea of a handwritten note that goes with the gift. A love note, if you will. And guys, learn the lesson. At some point in our lives, we give that gift to our significant other without the note, without the card. We feel that. We only do that once, twice, 3 times tops, right? That's a missed opportunity because that note says we've taken a moment, we've personalized it, we've made this intimate, this special connection. Well, that note has an outsized impact on the way they will feel about you. Yeah. And by extension, the way they feel about you. Small thing, outsized impact. So I talk about these love notes, and love notes are these things that cities will give to their citizens. And if you're lucky, citizens will occasionally give back to their cities. And I have a couple examples that I'd like to share with you. Pedestrian-friendly Times Square. How many of you have been back to New York City in the last couple of years and visited Times Square since it became pedestrian-friendly? An amazing transformation in the way you experience that city. In the past, when you went to Times Square, the one thing you really wanted to do was stop and look around, right? But you couldn't do it. Because if you stopped on the sidewalk, you're going to get run over by a New Yorker. One step off the curb, run over by a cat. But no, so what they did is they pushed the cars to the periphery, they bring in seating, they bring in Wi-Fi, and they turn Times Square into the ultimate place to people watch. Again, sensory overload, right? But now it's become this incredible performance venue as well. And I was told by the guy who runs the Times Square Business Alliance, he said in the last couple of years, locals have started to come back to Times Square. In the past, a local New Yorker would not have been caught dead in Times Square, because that's where all you tourists were, taking pictures, blocking traffic, that kind of stuff, right? But again, now because there's seating and Wi-Fi, performances, and again, ultimate place to people watch, locals have started to come back to Times Square. In the grand scheme of New York City, Times Square is a very small thing, but it has a very large outsized impact on the way people feel about that city. And your Campus Martius Park, I think, falls into this sort of very similar category. I mean, bringing the seating in down there like they did years ago, and turning that, the ice rink and all of that stuff, that is a love note. And you got to think about what that has done for that part of downtown. That's a pretty big outsized impact for what it's done. Good on you for that. Millennium Park in Chicago. Of course, everybody's been to Chicago, right? And when we all go to Millennium Park, we do a very similar thing. We walk up, we find our reflection, and we take our picture, right? You click. You take your friend's picture, click. You take this skyline picture, right? And while you're doing that, you're seeing people, especially kids, walking up and interacting and touching the art. Whoa, art you can touch? No way. Yeah. And they're interacting with it kind of like this giant funhouse mirror. And that's essentially what it is. And then, of course, you look over your shoulder, and those 2 towers, right? And these are actually video screens, and the eyes will open and will smile at you. And then during the summer months, these water cannons are shooting water out onto the deck, creating essentially a giant above-ground pool. And on a typical summer day, you'll see hundreds of kids there playing in the water. And here's a good city-making point we would all do very well to remember. When kids are happy, parents are happy, right? We know this. We feel this. And so certainly these water features are a great way to do that. And I know folks are saying, well, wait a minute, that's kind of expensive. That was a $450 million love note. Yes, it was. That is a big love note, agreed. So I took this picture in Braddock, Pennsylvania, a couple summers ago. Braddock's a little town outside of Pittsburgh. It's a little downtown park. It's a hot summer day. Kids are playing. And that down there in the corner, how much money do you need? The guy says, about $1,200. The mayor said, sold. So they cast like a dozen of these little mice. And they live in about a 6-block area all throughout downtown. And you will literally see people walking around downtown with these little maps. It says, okay, you come to this corner, you turn 45 degrees, you look up, and boom, there it is. And you'll literally hear kids, women, and men alike squealing with delight as they find these little mice. And once you found one, you're looking for them everywhere. It's like, where did these things? Oh, I found another one. And it becomes this little game that you're playing in downtown. They're really cute. All of the mice have a name. All of them have a backstory. And they even have a children's book that has sort of grown out of all of that. So again, amidst all of that really big stuff, the thing I remember is this silly little mice, these silly little mice there that absolutely surprised and delighted me. So sometimes, going small. Or sometimes you gotta go big. The Denver Convention Center. They redid the convention center about 10 years ago, and they commissioned, they said, we've got to have some great public art there. And so the project they ended up choosing was this one. It's called I See What You Mean, but of course locally it's known as the Big Blue Bear. The thing, can you imagine the first time the artist came in and proposed that to city council? Hey, I've got this idea for a statue. It's going to be really big, it's going to be a bear, and by the way, it's going to be blue. I suppose that conversation went over. Probably not so good. Because think about how many potholes you could fix for the cost of the Big Blue Bear. A lot. So if it's just about the financial side, if it's based on a purely financial accounting, you will never do anything like the Big Blue Bear. But there's value in the Big Blue Bear. The ultimate value, though, in the Big Blue Bear is that once you've seen the Big Blue Bear, you cannot unsee the Big Blue Bear. You will always remember it. And every one of those photos, and people take photos there all the time, every one of those that goes out on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, every one of those is a little postcard and a little reminder for folks all over the world that, hey, check out Denver. This is kind of surprising, delightful. Come, you should come, and see this. It's a great wayfinding piece, and it's become a beloved piece of downtown public art. Fantastic. Now, again, if it is just about the financial accounting of things, you will never do anything like the Big Blue Bear. You will never do anything fun and beautiful and artistic and whimsical. And I don't want to live in that city. I don't think any of us actually want to live in that city. We need to remind folks that even in the toughest of economic times, it cannot just be about the pure nickels and dimes of things. The people who know the cost of everything are often the ones who know the value of nothing. The value of the Big Blue Bear is far beyond what it costs. And we need to remind our citizens that. And because there's folks who want to hold, our politicians' feet to the fire for every nickel and every dime they spend that they see beyond police, fire, and fixing potholes. Again, I don't think even the toughest of Detroiters and the toughest folks from Michigan, I don't think we want to live in that functional, safe, and battleship-ready community. We don't deserve to live in that, even in the toughest of economic times. And that, I think, is an important lesson we need to carry forward. Cities have rituals and traditions just like families and organizations do. And one of my favorites is actually from Providence, Rhode Island. Water fire. Any folks been to Providence, Rhode Island? Yeah, a few. Amazing. About 15 years ago, this was started by an artist by the name of Barnaby Evans. And there's this river that snakes through the heart of downtown Providence and empties into this round lake. And what Barnaby did is just really very simple. They bring in these braziers, they anchor them in the middle of the river, they put in cords of pine wood, and they light them on fire. It's water and fire. It's the most basic thing in the world, and it is absolutely magical. Because you go down there during a water fire event, you smell that pine smoke, hear the crackle of that wood, see these great dancing shadows all over the city. It's essentially like a giant bonfire on the river. And I bet every one of us, we have sat in front of a campfire or a bonfire and been absolutely mesmerized by the experience. There's something in our human nature. We can watch fire and be incredibly content. Well, imagine taking that to a municipal level and you have water fire. And this is the downtown lake. You'll see thousands of people will come out for a water fire event. They do about 8 or 10 of these a year. And a few years ago, I was lucky enough to participate in what they call a lighting ceremony. And like the villagers out of a Frankenstein movie, we carry these torches from City Hall down to the river, we put the torches into the urn, and from the urn they light water fire. Very cool. And will always inform the way I think you feel about Providence. This is called the Iron Bridge. It's in a little town in western Massachusetts called Shelburne Falls. And 364 days out of the year, cars and trucks go back and forth across this bridge. But for about one night out of the year, and it's been in August for the last dozen years or so, they close down the bridge and they have dinner on it. They bring in the linen tablecloths, the linen napkins. Students are the waiters and waitresses. The local restaurants cater the event, and it's a giant fundraiser for the Chamber of Commerce. I love this project. Now, you may go back and forth across that bridge every day, going to and from work, to and from school. I guarantee you, having dinner on that bridge will make you see the bridge and make you see and feel your city differently by having dinner on that experience. Because think about it, we go past amazing stuff every day. We go past it at about 45 miles an hour. And when was the last time we actually stopped and had the opportunity to consider something like that? And it sort of begs the question here, what could we have dinner on here in Detroit? What could we have brunch on here in Detroit that might help people see and feel the city differently than they currently do? Maybe there's some stuff that we'd like to highlight. This is a great way to breaking bread, simple idea, I love it. Steal it freely. Any folks been to Austin? A few. This is the South Congress Bridge in Austin. And the South Congress Bridge is the home to North America's largest urban bat colony. Bats, those are bats.
There's a lot of bats.
And most of the time people would say, ooh, bats, ick, call animal control, right? But they didn't. And these bats actually live under this bridge. There's over 1 million of them. And they migrate, during the summer they're in Texas, and then during the winter they migrate further south. So at dusk,
as the sun's going down, the bats start to become very active. And as the sun goes down, they start coming out, a few at a time from underneath. And then all of a sudden, it's like somebody throws a switch, and it is literally like this torrent of bats that are come flying out from underneath the bridge. And it creates these strangely beautiful sort of scenes, as these bats fly in these clumps over the city. You see them highlighted against the backdrop. And it turns out bats are actually pretty good for the environment. They eat tons and tons of insects. And this is, to me, is a great example of taking what could be seen as a negative, ooh, ick, bats, right, and turning it into something positive. Because on a typical summer evening, there are hundreds of people who will line this bridge, and then there's parks on both sides. Why? To come out and have a social experience and to just watch the bats. Again, taking a negative and spinning it and turning it into a positive. Any folks here from Western Michigan, maybe Montague? Montague's a little town there on the west coast of Michigan, and a friend of mine said that she grew up there. Says there was this sort of long-standing tradition when they were kids in October. They would go into the neighborhoods and they would steal pumpkins, and they would go to the top of this hill in the heart of downtown Montague, and they'd bowl the pumpkins down the hill into the storefronts and into the cars below. She says, hey, it's a small town, and we were poor. So a few years ago, instead of fighting that, Montague said, well, what if we were to embrace that negative? So what they do is they've now sanctioned a pumpkin roll. So one weekend out in October, they bring out ramps. You can buy a pumpkin for $1. They bring in hay bales, and they sort of sanction the whole event. And again, a good example of taking negative behavior, and instead of trying to eradicate it, which I'm sure at some point they tried to do, says, well, wait a minute, what if we did a little judo on that and flip that around and maybe turn it into something positive? I think that's kind of a cool approach. This is thinking about some of the problems. Instead of trying to eradicate something, it's like, well, wait, what could we do to maybe flip it around a little bit and potentially turn it into a positive? The ultimate, though, in terms of lovable cities has got to be people. And it is the people in the places that are desperately, passionately in love with those places. And in my book, I call these folks co-creators, because they are essentially co-creating the experience of the city with us. We have the official folks, mayors, city council, city managers, those folks who make the city. But then there are these unofficial folks, the ones who don't do it out of a sense, who are not being paid to do it. They do it out of a sort of sense of pride and civic engagement and creativity. And it is just sort of this natural expression of who they are. This is my friend Bob Devin Jones. He is the creative director of a small black box theater in downtown St. Petersburg, where I live. And for those of us who live in St. Pete, we know Bob is one of those anchor personas in what makes St. Pete a great place to live, work, and play. Think about those anchor personas. We talk about anchor institutions, anchor businesses. We got all kinds of tools and language around those. What about those anchor people? Those ones who do extraordinary things, again, often, unrecognized officially, yet we know those people are making our cities much better, more interesting places. Those people are really important. And what we need to do is actually figure out how to work better with those, how to tell their stories even better, and bring them more to the forefront. And by doing that, we're going to encourage more of those people to sort of step up and do maybe something extraordinary for their places. Like this one, Candy Chang. After Hurricane Katrina, she did a number of projects, but one of the simplest ones she did was this stencil. It says, it's good to be here. And she used spray chalk, not spray paint. And she started spray chalking that message, it's good to be here, all over the city. Now think about that message in the context of New Orleans, a city that people thought they had lost. It's like, wow, it is good to be here. And when you start seeing that message over and over and over again, that's powerful. That is incredibly reinforcing. Cities will spend tons of money on internal branding campaigns and self-confidence campaigns, and yes, we should do that. That was a good thing. But sometimes you get lucky, and along comes somebody who loves their city, a creative person, who comes up with something so simple, yet so eloquent and so profound you could almost weep. It's good to be here. It's like, wow, that's great stuff. And that's a good example. These folks are operating from a different playbook. They don't necessarily see the problems the same way, and they're going to come up with solutions that maybe look and feel a bit different than the ones we might initially consider. How about somebody like Phil Cooley, the owner and proprietor of Slows? Now, I wrote about Phil I wrote the book in 2010, came out in 2011, and I've since, Phil's gotten a lot of press. You guys know Phil Cooley and Slows. Most people here in Detroit by now know. And if you talk, there's even a Phil Cooley backlash, because some people say he's got too much attention and all this kind of stuff. Well, nonetheless, I think the folks like Phil Cooley are pretty extraordinary, because not only is he a great story, but he has become sort of what I call a high-touch entrepreneur. You know, high-tech entrepreneurs, yes, we'd love to have more of those. High-volume entrepreneurs, yes, we'd like to have people, you know, those companies are going to employ hundreds, maybe thousands of people. But think about those high-touch entrepreneurs. The guys like Phil who are making places, these types of businesses that we just feel better about our city because we have them. Restaurants and coffee shops, the great local retail, you know, the little bookstore, the record shop, whatever it is that, you know, that we connect with in our neighborhood and our city. Go, I love this little store. I love what they do. And Phil does not score very high on your traditional economic development scorecard. I mean, granted, Slows has become a pretty good operation, but you know, again, compared to the big companies, you know, he's a dot, you know, on those economic development scorecards. Yet you know how important somebody like Phil and the story and what they've been able to do there in Corktown because of Slows, the high-touch entrepreneurs. So let's maybe consider how we might elevate more of them. And again, by doing that, we start to encourage more of those folks. Now, you guys know the Grand Rapids Lip Dub?
Yeah.
Has everybody seen the Grand Rapids Lip Dub? Okay, then I won't show that. But I do think it's important to remember how this sort of story comes about. Newsweek magazine writes about, you know, America's 10 most dying cities. And Grand Rapids ends up on that list. And it's based upon population loss between 2000 and 2010. Well, anybody who lives in Michigan knows Grand Rapids is far from a dying city. It's a pretty dynamic city. Yet nonetheless, Newsweek took one data point and they built a very damning narrative around that. So city goes, what are we going to do? We don't have any money. And in walks the guy in the green t-shirt, Rob Bliss, and proposes to do something kind of extraordinary. It's like, okay, let's do this lip dub thing. And I'm sure people said, what the hell is a lip dub? You know, lip singing to a popular song. He says, you know, we'll use YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. You know, it'll go viral. It'll be epic. It'll be great. How do you suppose that conversation went over the first time somebody heard it? You want to do a lip what? Using Yoo-hoo, Facebook, Twitter. I don't know about that. Viral. That just sounds bad. And I'm sure they looked at him and goes, you know what, son? How old are you? And have you ever done this before? Because let's face it, he does not look like a traditional city solutions provider. Not wearing a suit, not wearing a tie. And more appropriately, he doesn't have a stack of reports that say, if you do this, you get these very predictable outcomes on the other end. No, none of that. He was a 22-year-old kid with an idea and an enthusiasm, and he thought he could pull it off. Now, obviously, we know that they were actually able to pull that off. And I think that sort of speaks volumes about, you know, a little bit of risk-taking. Because the video's since been viewed over 5 million times. It got picked up by national, international media. You know, Rob got interviewed on Good Morning America. And I suppose if we did the accounting in terms of positive brand exposure, I think Grand Rapids probably got tens of millions of dollars of positive brand exposure because of that. Because they're willing to listen to a 22-year-old kid who had a weird, wacky, and an untested idea. Let's not go out and do another lip dub. It's been done. It's been done really well. But let's recognize that maybe the solutions to our city's problems may not look like any solution that we've ever seen before. Because, you know, where in the city manager's handbook is the page on lip dubs? It doesn't exist. And then let's also recognize that maybe the solutions providers are not going to look like the ones we're used to dealing with. You know, they may be younger, they may be older, they may speak with accents, they may have the pants down to here, the hats on sideways, the piercings, the tattoos, and those freaky earlobes that go all the way down to here, right? And we as a community need to be okay with that. Because I think, you know, it would probably been interesting if, you know, the powers that be had said to Rob, thanks, Mr. Bliss, we'll go talk to our marketing company, we'll be fine. We'll never know. But I think the real outcome of that would have been, Rob probably would have said, you know, the heck with this, I will take my talents elsewhere. And I think that would have been a real loss for the community. You know, because Rob's earliest iterations with the city, he doesn't just show up to do the lip dub. He actually did, the first thing he did with the city, he organized pillow fights in the park of the city, which led to doing this giant water slide in the heart of downtown Grand Rapids, which led him to the art prize competition for which they made 100,000 paper airplanes, and they threw them off the roof of the tallest building there in downtown as the symphony orchestra played below, which sets him up perfectly to be sort of a hero for his community with the Grand Rapids lip dub. So, you know, the idea of that silly little project, it's like, why would anybody want to organize pillow fights in the park? That's what we're down to. We've got potholes to fix. We got real problems, and you want to organize pillow fights in the park? Yeah, I do. Because pillow fights in the park, you know, they do something silly and they get some confidence, they get some experience, and hey, that was cool. Let's do it again. And then they go and they do something else, and they do something else. And 2 or 3 iterations down the road, you could have an absolute game changer for your community because you didn't step on that weird little project that seemed kind of silly at the time when you had that, the opportunity. Let's not lose sight of that. In the midst of all the important stuff and the hard work that we are actually doing, let's not forget those silly little projects that maybe we don't quite understand, and the people are just like, really? You want to do what? Okay, sure, why not? And I think Detroit is actually a fantastic laboratory for that. That's what people have said to me over and over again, that, they can come here and they can do some amazing things. And that, I think, is part of what you absolutely want to have here. Those folks who are going to go out, the Phil Cooleys and the Bob Devin Joneses of the world, the Tyreek Guytons, folks like that, those are the folks, they're like spice in a great dish. You don't need a lot of them, but you got to have some of them. Otherwise, it makes for a bland dish. If you don't have those people, it makes for a bland community. And if we forget to sort of nurture and encourage those folks, that's also going to make for a fairly bland community as well. Now, I have a few thoughts specifically for Detroit. And I took this picture just the other day in Sacramento, and I just love this sentence. It says, when you look at a city, it's like reading the hopes, aspirations, and pride of everyone who built it. And that's a really nice sort of, just a wonderful thought, and it just is a nice reminder to all of us who do care about our places. One of the things that Detroit has in abundance, I think, is this opportunity to make meaning. And certainly one of the things you probably have, by comparison, a deficit of is amenities. And I say that in the sense that most cities want to play what I call the amenities game, which is you line up all the cool stuff you have and say, come, partake of our bounty. Oh, we've got sports, we've got arts and culture, we've got performing arts venues, we've got parks, we've got yada, yada, yada. Well, the thing is that the bigger cities will always win at that particular game. And Chicago will always beat you at the amenities game. And London will always beat Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. And it all sort of works that way. So the amenities game favors bigger cities. Well, if you don't have, then what else could you possibly do? Well, what about meaning? The opportunity that your city actually is a place where you can come and make something happen. And it's certainly for young professionals and a lot of those hipsters and a lot of these entrepreneurs that we're talking about, the opportunity to come and make a difference is a huge draw. And what might that look like if we were to do something like that? Well, it might look like this, believe it or not. This is John Fetterman. He's the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, the place with the garden hose that I showed you. Well, Braddock was a little town outside of Pittsburgh. At the height of the steel industry, it had about 30,000 people. Now it has less than 3,000 people. And most cities, if they lost 90% of their population, they take the ball and go home. Game over, right? But Braddock is not, and in fact, they've done some pretty interesting things. He's gotten very involved. He doesn't look like a typical mayor, for one thing. He's about 6'5", weighs well over 300 pounds. Kind of looks like a biker or a James Bond villain, as opposed to a mayor. But he's done some really amazing things. He spent a lot of his own money. He's rehabbed buildings himself, and he found some interesting partners. Oh, by the way, he's kind of all in. When he won his first election, he said, to prove I'm all in, he got a tattoo of the zip code for Braddock on his arm. And I often ask politicians when I present this, any of you next election cycle willing to get a tattoo? Lots of humming and hawing on that one. So what he did is he found a really interesting partner in the Levi Strauss Company. And about 3 years ago, Levi came in and they shot a series of little microfilms, little documentary films about what it's like to live in Braddock. And what I've got to show you is essentially an ad, for lack of a better word. But I think it's actually far more than that, in the sense that it actually captures the essence of what it's like to live in Braddock. Why do you want to go to a place that clearly has no amenities per se, but why it might actually be a place that some people would actually gravitate to? And I think it's something that probably resonates in Detroit as well. This was shot entirely in Braddock. Can we pull out down any of the lights? It starts out a little quiet. These are all Braddock citizens, and the narrator is a child from Braddock.
They
maybe the world breaks on purpose so that we will have work to do. That is so far from what happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas. It's not and there's something about that. You know, you look at that and go, wow, there is something compelling about that. It is this notion of the frontier. And as Americans, that notion of the frontier is incredibly powerful to us. That opportunity to go to a place and feel like what you do makes a difference. We may all love Chicago, but you know, how many of us feel like we can go and make a difference in Chicago? Hard to do. But I bet the folks who live here, the folks who come here, they feel like, you know what, maybe I can make a difference here in Detroit. And what if we were to sort of play that, card? That would be a brave message, because you have to sort of admit the things that you don't have. You know, it says, look, things are tough here. And they're, but with your help, they could get a whole heck of a lot better. That would be an incredibly interesting and powerful lure for, I think, a lot of, especially young people, the young entrepreneurs, the ones who aren't afraid to run into, a burning building kind of situation. And I'm kind of running out of time, and I apologize because we went a little long. I was going to show you a couple other things, but I wanted to finish on couple things. As an outsider here, and as I come and I hear people talk about, Detroit and you guys, I don't think you have to convince the world. I think you just got to convince more of yourselves. The people here, there was one of the students who picked me up yesterday. She said when she was traveling around with her parents and she was visiting other schools, and they visited someplace, out of state, and they asked her where she was from, she said Detroit. Her parents said, don't tell me from Detroit. Because they were afraid of the negative perception that people would have of somebody from Detroit. And she said that now she goes to Wayne State, and she said in the last few years her parents have now sort of come around on Detroit, and they're actually, they're okay with the city. They're feeling better about the city. So yes, it'd be great to tell the rest of the world and to trumpet that, but I think we got to work on convincing ourselves that this is, the place that we want to be, and it is, it is our future. So I think there's that. And then the last thing I'd like to sort of point out is we need to be better storytellers. And in a day when we're going to be talking about storytelling, I think this is an important point to make. A friend of mine who's the city manager of Springfield, Missouri, told me this story. This really brought it home for me. He said early on in his tenure as the city manager, this was just he started a couple years ago, he was in one of those weekly meetings where he has all of his department heads come together, and he heard a couple of the guys from Public Works were talking. Public Works in Springfield runs the sewers there. So these guys were saying, oh, this interesting thing happened this week. This woman had called Public Works in a panic. She said, my mother, who's elderly, who lives with us, who has dementia, we think she has thrown her wedding rings down the toilet. Is there anything you guys can do to help us? He said, well, let us investigate. So they went, they checked the schematics and the engineering, and said, well, she lives in this neighborhood, it could be this. So they said, okay, well then they sent a team down into the sewers, they went to this one particular junction, they went to this catch basin, they opened it up, boom, they found the rings. Of course, the woman family were ecstatic. They said, oh, of course, you're very welcome. And Greg, the city manager, about jumped over the table, he says, why didn't you tell us this? And the guys from Public Works said, well, it's what we do. We don't do it for applause. We're not taking bows. He goes, no, he says, it's not about taking bows. It's not about the applause. It's about telling the story. Because you know what? Cities get beat up over the 0.001% of the time when they don't do it right. But the 99.999% of the time that you do it right, nobody really cares. That family certainly cares. The people that you directly benefit, they don't care. But we need to become better storytellers and get that message out there. When the city works, and when it works extraordinarily well, like it did for that woman and her family, we need to tell that story. And every day the city is generating great stories like that, but they sit on them because they don't know that that's maybe what they need to do. Cities need chief storytellers as much as they need chief information officers and chief marketing officers. And people who are going to tease out those great stories, because we recognize a great story. That's sort of what we do, right? That is what you guys do. But not everybody realizes they're sitting on a great story. Until they see one, they go, oh, I get it. Because that great story, that makes a difference. All kinds of information being generated around our cities. There's more data around cities than ever before. I don't remember the data. In fact, I don't even really care about the data. Tell me a good story, I will remember that. We need to become better storytellers. We've got to wrap up the good data that we have into a great story, and that will become the message. And somebody asked me last night, says, well, how do you get the stories out there? I said, well, there's all kinds of tools out there, but here's the thing. Great stories have a way of getting around.
Because we all want to tell a great story. Oh, did you hear the one about this? Yeah, isn't that cool? Yes, it is. That's cool. That is the heart of things. Let's become better storytellers. Let's be emotionally true in stuff. You can be factually true, okay, but let's be emotionally true. Let's not, BS each other with stuff and all the stuff that we hope to be. Let's be honest about that, because that kind of story does ring true. Emotionally true, and be better storytellers. It's on you guys to help lead the folks and lead cities and organizations, moving forward into all this. I know we can do it, and I know that's exactly what today is all about. So thank you very much, and long live Detroit.
Wow, there's a lot to think about there. Peter's book is for sale. He'll be out during the break. If you'd like to stop by, there's a table out there with some of his books. Our next panel, I think some of our panel members are here. So as they are coming up, perhaps if there's one or two quick questions for Peter.
I have a question.
Yes.
I see a lot of your discussion is based around downtown and things of that sort. I think you have a lot of energy in the downtown area, but there needs to be a bridge into more of the stories that come out of the neighborhoods. Downtown story is very entrepreneurial, very, where the city is going, and all of that stories of crime and, everything else that goes on in the neighborhood. So I'm wondering, in your findings, how you found other cities are able to bridge all of that together for a greater good?
It's hard. I mean, let's be honest. Downtowns are the psychic centers of places. They are the economic centers. They are the psychic centers. They are the drivers of that. But what tends to happen is they sort of become the inspiration. It's like, hey, if they could do that downtown, well, could we do that in our neighborhood? Yeah, we could. You do it on a different scale, and maybe it doesn't get as much attention, and maybe that is part of it. Scale does matter. But I suspect that, for every sort of story that I'm telling, downtown, I bet if you found those different neighborhoods, somebody's going to say, oh yeah, we're doing something like that. And I think that it does become again on the scale. I think it's not necessarily, it'd be great if the rest of the city knew what was happening in a particular neighborhood, but it's more important that the folks in that neighborhood know what's happening in that neighborhood. And again, I think that we do a decent job around that because again, good stories do spread. But yes, it'd be great if we could elevate more of that, and hopefully, maybe what we do is we just need to have those folks need a little bit of help in telling their story a little bit better.